Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. Nash Ellery never imagined that clearing an old hornet's nest would change everything he thought he knew about his family's land. The 60-year-old widower was just trying to make a fresh start with his daughter Brooke, who had moved back home after her divorce. On a warm August morning in rural Tennessee, Nash fired up his backhoe to remove the massive nest wedged in a hollow oak tree. As the brittle structure crumbled under the bucket's grip, something fell out, a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were letters from 1935, faded photographs, and a hand-drawn map. What secret had been hidden in that tree for 90 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nash Ellery sat on the weathered porch of the old farmhouse, the metal box resting on the wooden table between him and his daughter. The August sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the 80 acres of inherited land that had sat mostly untouched for 3 years. "Careful with it," Nash said, though Brooke's hands were already gentle as she worked the rusted clasp. At 35, his daughter had inherited her mother's careful nature, that measured approach to things that mattered. The clasp gave way with a soft click that seemed too quiet for the moment. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilcloth that crinkled like old parchment, lay the contents of someone's desperate hope. Brooke lifted out a stack of letters, the paper yellowed and brittle at the edges. Beneath them, a photograph, its corners rounded by time. A young couple stood before the same massive oak tree where Nash had found the box, the woman holding an infant, both dressed in the simple, worn clothing of the Depression era. "Look at the back," Brooke whispered, turning the photograph over. In faded ink, careful handwriting read, "Samuel and Constance Hardigan, 1935. Nash leaned closer, studying the faces. Samuel's expression was serious, the kind of weight in his eyes that spoke of a man carrying responsibilities he wasn't sure he could bear. Constance looked tired but hopeful, one hand on the baby, the other resting on her husband's arm. "That's the same tree," Nash said. "The one where I found this." Brooke set the photograph down carefully and lifted out a tarnished locket, a hand-drawn map on aged paper, and more letters, each one folded with precision. The map showed property boundaries, marked locations, small notations in the same careful handwriting. Nash had inherited this land from his uncle 3 years ago, a man he'd barely known who'd bought the property in 1978. The farmhouse had stood empty most of that time, used occasionally as a hunting cabin. When his uncle died, Nash had been surprised to learn he was the sole heir. He'd been even more surprised at how little he'd done with it. After Alice died 5 years ago, purpose had become something Nash only vaguely remembered. He'd worked as a civil engineer for 35 years, retired at 58, and then spent 2 years watching his wife fade from cancer. The 3 years since had been a blur of empty days and restless nights. Until Brooke called 6 months ago, her voice tight with the kind of pain he recognized too well. "Dad, Jason and I are getting divorced." She'd moved back home 2 months later, her 2 kids staying with their father for the summer while she found her footing. At first, Nash hadn't known what to say, how to help. They'd circled each other carefully in his small house in town, 2 people trying to rebuild their lives in the same space. Then Nash remembered the farm. "Let's go out there," he'd suggested one evening. "Clean it up. Maybe you and the kids could stay there when they come back. Fresh start." Brooke had agreed, and for the past month, they'd been working weekends, clearing overgrowth, assessing what the old house needed. It had been good, having a project, having a reason to get up early, having his daughter back, even under circumstances neither of them would have chosen. Now, sitting on this porch with a mystery literally in their hands, Nash felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, purpose, connection to something larger than his own grief. "Should we read them?" Brooke asked, her fingers hovering over the letters. I think we should, Nash said. She selected one from the middle of the stack, unfolded it carefully, and began to read aloud. The handwriting was Samuel's, the date March 1935. My dearest Constance, if you are reading this, then I have failed to retrieve what I have hidden. The bank has given us until the end of the month. I cannot bear to see them take everything, especially not the items your mother left you. The things meant for Ruth. I have made arrangements to keep them safe until we can recover. Times will get better. They must. Your loving husband, Samuel. Brooke's voice caught on the last words. She set the letter down, picked up another. This one was longer, more detailed. Samuel described hiding something valuable. Mentioned beneath where the creek bends twice and 30 paces from the lightning tree. He wrote about his shame, his desperation, his determination to protect what little they had left. They lost the farm, Nash said quietly. He tried to save something for them. And it's been here all this time, Brooke added. She looked at her father, and he saw in her eyes the same question he was thinking. We need to find out what happened to them, Nash said. And if that whatever Samuel hid is still out there somewhere. They spent the next hour sorting the letters by date, reading through fragments of a family's desperate struggle. The Hardigans had fought to keep their farm during the worst years of the Depression. Samuel had taken odd jobs. Constance had sold what she could, but the mathematics of poverty were merciless. The last letter was dated November 1935. After that, nothing. Tomorrow, Nash said, as the sun finally dropped below the tree line, we'll go to the county records office. See what we can find out. Brooke nodded, then reached across the table and squeezed her father's hand. Thank you, she said. For what? For bringing me here. For giving me something to think about besides my own mess. Nash squeezed back. We're going to be okay, honey. Both of us. He believed it, maybe for the first time since Alice died. Not because anything had changed about his circumstances, but because he'd found something that mattered beyond his own pain. A family had suffered here, had hoped here, had hidden their treasures in the earth, and trusted that someday, somehow, things would get better. Nash didn't know yet if they ever had, but he was going to find out. As they carried the box inside, securing it in a cabinet for the night, Nash paused at the window. The old oak tree stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its massive branches reaching outward like arms that had held secrets for 90 years. Whatever Samuel Hardigan had hidden, wherever Constance and little Ruth had gone after losing their farm, their story wasn't finished. Nash was going to make sure of that. The county records office smelled like old paper and floor polish, a combination that reminded Nash of elementary school libraries. He and Brooke sat at a wooden table while the clerk, a woman in her 60s named Judith, returned with a stack of property records. Hardigan, you said? Judith laid the files on the table. That name sounds familiar. My grandmother used to tell stories about families from those years. Nash opened the first folder. Inside were property deeds, tax records, and foreclosure notices, all written in the careful typewriter script of the 1930s. Here, he said, pointing to a document dated February 1936. Foreclosure. First Farmers Bank of Sullivan County versus Samuel T. Hardigan. Brooke leaned in, reading over his shoulder. The legal language was formal, but the meaning was clear. Samuel had defaulted on his mortgage. The bank had seized the property. The family had 30 days to vacate. What happened after? Brooke asked Judith. The clerk adjusted her glasses, scanning another document. Property was sold at auction in April 1936, bought by a man named, Herbert Caldwell. He held it until 1952. Then it changed hands 3 more times before your uncle purchased it in 1978. Any record of where the Hardigans went? Nash asked. Judith shook her head. Families just disappeared back then. No forwarding addresses, no paper trail. They went where they could find work, where they had relatives, wherever they could survive. But Nash wasn't ready to give up. Census records? Death certificates? Those would be at the state archives, Judith said. But I can check our obituary files. We keep newspapers going back to 1890. She disappeared into a back room and returned 20 minutes later with a photocopied page. Found something. From 1962. The obituary was brief. Constance Hardigan Riley, age 73. Died peacefully at Meadowview Nursing Home. Survived by daughter Ruth Hardigan Summerfield and 3 grandchildren. Services private. Ruth, Brooke said softly. The baby in the photograph. She survived. And she married, Nash added. Became Ruth Summerfield. They spent another hour searching, and Brooke's phone proved more useful than the paper records. She found Ruth's obituary from 2012. Ruth had lived in Chattanooga, had 3 children, worked as a seamstress for 40 years. She died at 87, survived by numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren. One name stood out, Martin Summerfield, listed as a grandson, residing in Knoxville. We should contact him, Brooke said. Nash hesitated. And tell him what? That we found letters his great-grandfather wrote? That there might be something valuable buried on our property? That we found his family's history, Brooke corrected. And yes, that there might be something that belongs to him. Back at the farm that afternoon, Nash made the call. Martin answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cautious until Nash explained who he was and why he was calling. My grandmother, Ruth, Martin said slowly. She hardly ever talked about her childhood. I knew they'd lost the farm during the Depression, but she never gave details. Your great-grandfather Samuel buried something valuable, Nash explained. At least, that's what his letters say. We found them hidden in an old tree on the property. There was a long silence. Then Martin said, My grandmother told me once, when I was a kid, that her father had hidden something important. She said she tried to remember where, but she was too young when they left. She was only 3 years old. Would you like us to look for it? Nash asked. If we find anything, it belongs to your family. Another pause. Yes, please. And thank you for calling. Most people wouldn't have. After the call ended, Nash and Brooke returned to examining the letters. One in particular caught their attention, written in Constance's delicate handwriting rather than Samuel's firm script. The paper was torn at one edge, and the writing was cramped, as if she'd been trying to fit as much as possible on a small page. It was dated July 1935, and unlike Samuel's practical instructions, this was personal. My dearest Ruth, though you cannot yet read these words, I write them for the woman you will become. These are dark times. Your father works from dawn until dark, and still it is not enough. Yesterday, I sold my mother's silver service for $11. It broke my heart, but you had a fever and needed medicine. Today you smiled at me, and I knew I would sell everything I own to keep you safe and well. Your father has found a way to protect some valuables, the last things of worth we possess. If times become impossible, if we lose this place, know that he tried everything. Know that we loved you more than land, more than gold, more than anything on this earth. You are 3 years old today. I made you a small cake from the last of our sugar. You clapped your hands and laughed, and for a moment, the weight lifted. I pray you will never know hardship like this. I pray you will grow up safe and loved and full of joy. Your mother, who loves you always. Brooke's eyes were wet when she finished reading. She was writing to her daughter, hoping she'd find these someday. Nash took the letter carefully, studying Constance's handwriting. The words were a mother's prayer, written in desperation but filled with love. Ruth never found them, he said quietly. She never knew her mother wrote this. But Martin will, Brooke said. We can give this to him. We can give him his family's story. That settled it. They would search the property thoroughly, methodically, following every clue Samuel had left. Not for themselves, but for Martin, for Ruth's memory, for a family that had suffered and hoped and hidden their treasures in the earth. Nash spread out Samuel's hand-drawn map on the kitchen table. The landmarks were clear. The oak tree, the creek, something labeled lightning tree, and several marked locations. "We start tomorrow," he said. "First thing." As evening fell, Nash stood alone on the porch, looking out over the land. Somewhere beneath his feet, beneath 90 years of soil and seasons, lay whatever Samuel Hartigan had hidden. Gold, jewelry, family heirlooms, the letters mentioned all of these. But Nash understood now that the real treasure wasn't buried in the ground. It was in the letters themselves, in Constance's words to her daughter, in Samuel's desperate hope that somehow, someday, things would be better. That treasure, at least, they'd already found. And tomorrow, they'd search for the rest. The metal detector let out a steady beep as Nash swept it across the ground near the eastern property line. Brooke walked beside him, marking spots with small flags whenever the detector signaled something beneath the soil. They'd been at it since sunrise, and the morning dew had long since burned off. The lightning tree had been easy to identify, a scarred oak near the boundary fence, its trunk marked by a vertical slash where electricity had once torn through the wood decades ago. 30 paces from the lightning tree, Nash muttered, counting his steps again. But 30 of Samuel's paces or 30 of mine. And which direction? Brooke added. She consulted the map again, turning it to align with the landscape. The creek's changed course since 1935. The map shows it running closer to the tree. Nash stopped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We might be digging in the wrong place entirely." The metal detector beeped insistently. Nash marked the spot and pulled a folding shovel from his pack. The soil was hard-packed clay mixed with rocks. 6 inches down, his shovel struck metal. "Got something," he called. Brooke hurried over as Nash carefully excavated around the object. It was a horseshoe, rusted and ancient, probably from farming equipment long abandoned. "Add it to the collection," Brooke said with a slight smile. They'd already unearthed 3 horseshoes, a broken plow blade, various nails and screws, and what appeared to be parts of an old water pump. Each time the detector beeped, Nash felt a surge of hope. Each time he found another piece of old farm equipment, that hope dimmed a little. By noon, they'd covered a 1/4 acre around the lightning tree, with nothing to show but a pile of rust and frustration. "Let's take a break," Nash suggested. They walked back to the farmhouse, and Nash made sandwiches while Brooke checked her phone. Her expression darkened as she read. "Jason again?" Nash asked gently. She nodded. "He wants to change the custody arrangement. Says the kids need stability, and I'm living in my father's house, not providing a proper home." Nash felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "You're rebuilding. That takes time. The kids understand that, do they?" Brooke set her phone down hard. "I failed at my marriage. I'm 35 years old, living with my father, searching for buried treasure like someone who's had the courage to start over," Nash interrupted. "Like someone who didn't give up when things got hard." Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes I feel like Ruth must have felt. Watching everything fall apart and not being able to stop it." Nash moved around the table and hugged his daughter. Ruth survived. She built a life, raised a family, worked for 40 years. She didn't let the depression define her. "How do you know that?" Brooke asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Because she had Martin, and Martin had children, and they're out there living their lives. Whatever Ruth lost, she found something else worth keeping." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Brooke pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Okay, let's get back out there." That afternoon, they shifted their search to the northwest corner of the property, where Nash vaguely remembered seeing old stone ruins years ago. It took an hour of walking through thick underbrush before they found them, the remains of what had once been a foundation, now mostly covered by decades of leaf litter and encroaching vegetation. "Could have been a barn," Nash said, examining the stonework. "Or a storage building." They spent the next 2 hours clearing the area, pulling back vines and brush. The foundation formed a rectangle about 20 feet by 30 feet. In one corner, they found a cluster of broken glass bottles, their labels long since rotted away. Brooke was working along the southern edge when her shovel struck something that didn't sound like stone or glass. She knelt down, brushing away soil with her hands. "Dad," she called, "come look at this." Nestled in the dirt was a small tin toy, partially buried. She worked it free carefully. It was a horse, painted once in bright colors that had faded to ghosts of red and white. One of its legs was bent, but otherwise it was intact. Nash took it gently, turning it over in his hands. This was Ruth's. How do you know? Because what else would a 3-year-old girl have brought with her? Her parents lost everything, but someone, probably Constance, grabbed this for her daughter. Brooke's voice was soft. And then they left it behind anyway. They kept digging around the foundation, finding more pieces of the Hartigan family's life. Broken dishes with delicate floral patterns, medicine bottles, a rusted pocket knife, a woman's hair comb with 3 teeth missing. Each item was a fragment of normal life interrupted, a snapshot of the moment when a family's world collapsed. Nash cleaned the tin horse as best he could and set it aside. "We'll send this to Martin." It belonged to his grandmother. As the sun began its descent, they continued methodically working the perimeter. The metal detector gave another strong signal near a cluster of rocks at the foundation's northeast corner. Nash dug carefully, and this time his shovel struck wood. "Brooke," he said quietly. She was beside him in seconds. Together, they excavated around the object. It was a wooden box, badly rotted, falling apart as they tried to lift it. Inside were more letters, protected somewhat by an inner layer of oilcloth. These were different personal letters from Samuel to Constance, apparently never sent or saved for some reason. Nash sat back on his heels, holding one of the letters up to the fading light. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. "My dearest wife, I have failed you. Failed Ruth. Failed to be the man you deserved. Tomorrow the bank comes. I have made one final arrangement, one last hiding place where only God can see. If we must leave, at least you will know I tried everything. Forgive me. Your husband, Samuel." "Where only God can see," Brooke repeated. "What does that mean?" Nash folded the letter carefully. "Sacred ground. A cemetery, maybe. Or a church. Is there a cemetery on the property? I don't know, but we're going to find out." They returned to the farmhouse as twilight settled over the land. Nash spread out the old property surveys he'd gotten from the county, studying them under the kitchen light. Brooke pulled up historical maps on her laptop. "Here," she said, pointing at the screen. "Property survey from 1884 shows a family cemetery in the southwest corner." Nash leaned over her shoulder. "I've never seen it. Probably overgrown. Forgotten." They marked the location on a modern map, and Nash felt his heart beat faster. Tomorrow they would search there. Tomorrow they might finally find what Samuel had hidden where only God could see. But tonight they had Ruth's toy horse. They had Constance's words to her daughter. They had pieces of a family's broken life that could finally be made whole. "Call Martin," Nash said. "Tell him we're sending his grandmother's horse home." The southwest corner of the property was wild territory. Nash and Brooke pushed through shoulder-high weeds and tangled brush, following the coordinates from the old survey map. The summer heat pressed down on them, and mosquitoes rose in clouds from the damp undergrowth. "There," Brooke said, pointing ahead. Through the vegetation, Nash could make out shapes weathered stones rising from the earth at odd angles. They cleared the last 20 feet of brush and stepped into what had once been a small cemetery. Most of the headstones were simple field stones, barely carved, their inscriptions worn smooth by a century of weather. Nash counted 7 markers, the dates ranging from 1847 to 1891. None bore the Hardigan name. Early settlers, Nash said, reading what little remained legible on the stones. Probably the family who first homesteaded this land. "Look at this one," Brooke called from the far side of the plot. She stood before a larger stone, flat and rectangular, surrounded by the rusted remnants of an iron fence that had mostly sunk into the earth. Unlike the others, this stone had no inscription at all. Nash knelt beside it, running his hands over the surface. No name, no dates. Why would someone place a marker with nothing on it? Maybe it wasn't a marker, Brooke suggested. Maybe it was covering something. They looked at each other, and Nash felt the same electricity he'd experienced finding the first box. "Help me clear around the edges." They worked carefully, removing decades of accumulated soil and vegetation from around the stone. It was larger than it first appeared, roughly 4 feet by 3 feet and thick. Nash estimated it weighed several hundred pounds. "We'll need tools to move this," he said. "A pry bar, maybe the come-along from the barn." It took 2 hours to gather equipment and rig a system of levers and pulleys. The stone resisted at first, then shifted with a grinding sound that made Nash think of doors opening after being sealed for generations. Beneath the stone was a hollow, not a grave, but a deliberately created space lined with more stones. And at the bottom, wrapped in multiple layers of oilcloth, was a metal strongbox. Nash's hands shook as he lifted it out. The box was substantial, far heavier than the first one they'd found. A rusted padlock secured the lid. "Should we open it here?" Brooke asked. "Let's get it back to the house. Do this properly." They carried it between them, taking turns when their arms grew tired. Back at the farmhouse, Nash found a hacksaw and carefully cut through the old lock. The lid opened with a groan of protesting hinges. Inside, carefully wrapped in individual cloth bundles, lay the Hardigan family's last treasures. The first bundle contained gold coins. Nash counted 42 of them, dated from the 1920s, each one gleaming as if they'd been minted yesterday instead of nearly a century ago. The second bundle held jewelry, a pocket watch, silver and ornate, a ruby brooch, a string of pearls, a man's wedding band. Each piece was beautiful, well-crafted, the kind of heirlooms families passed down through generations. The third bundle was different. Inside was a sealed envelope, the wax still intact despite the years. The writing on the front read, "For my daughter Ruth, to be opened on her 21st birthday." Nash and Brooke stared at the envelope in silence. "She never got it," Brooke finally said. "Ruth never knew this existed." "Should we?" Nash began. "Call Martin," Brooke finished. "He should decide." But before they made the call, Nash carefully examined the rest of the strongbox's contents. At the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of silk that had somehow survived the decades, was a simple gold wedding band. He held it up to the light and saw an inscription inside. "Eternally, S.H. Samuel's ring to Constance." "They didn't take their wedding rings when they left," Brooke said quietly. "They left everything that mattered." Nash felt the weight of 90 years pressing down on him. Samuel and Constance had hidden these treasures, hoping their daughter would someday find them, would have something to build a life on. But Ruth had been 3 years old when they lost the farm, too young to remember, too young to know where to look. She'd lived her entire life not knowing this existed. He made the call to Martin, and this time the conversation was longer, more emotional. Nash explained everything they'd found, the location, the contents, the sealed letter to Ruth. "My grandmother's 21st birthday would have been 1953, Martin said, his voice thick. "She was already married by then. Had my mother. She never knew her father had left this for her. "The letter is sealed," Nash said. "We haven't opened it. That's your family's privacy." There was a long pause. Then Martin said, "Open it, please. Ruth would want the truth known, whatever it is." With Brooke on speakerphone beside him, Nash carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, probably the last good stationery Constance had owned. The writing was clear, deliberate, every word chosen with care. Nash read aloud, "My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, you are a woman now and strong enough to know the truth. You are my daughter in every way that matters, but you were born to my beloved sister Margaret, who died bringing you into this world. Your father, the man who abandoned Margaret when she needed him most, wanted nothing to do with you. So Samuel and I took you into our hearts and our home. We could not have children of our own, and you became the greatest blessing of our lives. These treasures belonged to Margaret. They were meant for you, her daughter, given in love before she left this world. We have hidden them to keep them safe, to ensure you will have something when you are grown. You were never a burden, never a duty. You were our joy, our purpose, our truest treasure. If you are reading this, we are likely gone, and I pray you have lived a good life, full of love and happiness. Know that you were chosen. Know that you were wanted. Know that every sacrifice we made was made gladly. Your mother, who loved you with all her heart, Constance." Silence filled the phone line. Nash heard Martin breathing, heard the catch in his throat. "My grandmother," Martin finally said, "used to tell me that family isn't about blood. She said family is about who chooses to love you, who chooses to stay. I never knew why she felt that so strongly. Now you do," Nash said gently. "She was adopted," Martin continued, "in everything but the legal paperwork. And they lost everything trying to give her a future." After they ended the call with promises that Martin would visit soon, Nash and Brooke sat in the kitchen, the strongbox between them, surrounded by the remnants of a family's desperate hope. "We have to give this to Martin," Brooke said. "All of it," Nash agreed. "The coins, the jewelry, everything. It's his family's legacy." "Dad, that's probably worth." "I know what it's worth," Nash interrupted. "And that's exactly why it needs to go to him. This was Samuel's gift to his daughter. We're just the messengers." 3 days later, Martin Summerfield's car pulled up the long driveway to the farmhouse. Nash watched from the porch as Martin emerged, then carefully helped his wife from the passenger seat. Paulette moved slowly, using a walker, her movements deliberate and measured. Brooke came out to join Nash, and together they walked down to greet their guests. Martin was younger than Nash expected, late 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes that carried the weight of worry. Paulette was small and thin, her smile warm despite the obvious difficulty movement caused her. "Thank you for inviting us," Martin said, shaking Nash's hand firmly. "This is my wife, Paulette." "Multiple sclerosis," Paulette said simply, as if to address the unspoken question. "Don't let it make you uncomfortable." "I don't." Nash liked her immediately. They gave Martin and Paulette the tour slowly, adjusting to Paulette's pace. First, they walked to the old oak tree where Nash had found the initial box. Martin stood there for a long time, one hand on the bark, looking up into the branches. "My grandmother Ruth kept a photograph," he said, "of herself as a small child, standing in front of a tree. She told me once it was the only picture she had from before they lost everything. This was that tree." Next, they visited the stone foundation where they'd found Ruth's tin horse. Martin held the small toy in his hands, and Nash saw tears slide down his cheeks. "Ruth had a photo of herself with a toy horse," Martin said quietly. "She told me it was her most prized possession before the Depression. Her mother had given it to her. She never mentioned that she'd had to leave it behind." Finally, they walked to the cemetery site where the strongbox had been buried. Martin stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at the flat stone they'd moved, now repositioned beside the hole. "They hid it in sacred ground," he said. My great-grandfather was a man of faith. He was a man who loved his family, Nash corrected gently. Back at the farmhouse, Nash had arranged everything on the kitchen table, the coins in neat stacks, the jewelry laid out on a piece of velvet, the letters organized chronologically, and the photograph of Samuel, Constance, and baby Ruth in a simple frame. Martin approached the table slowly, Paulette beside him. He picked up the photograph first, studying the faces of his great-grandparents. I never knew them, he said. Ruth barely remembered her father. She was only 3 when they lost the farm. Her mother Constance lived until 1962, but Ruth said she never talked about the past. It was too painful. He set down the photograph and picked up the wedding ring, reading the inscription. Eternally S. H. Samuel Hardigan. Then he read Constance's letter to Ruth, the one that revealed the truth about Ruth's birth. By the time he finished, both Martin and Paulette were crying. My grandmother never knew, Martin said. She lived her whole life not knowing she was adopted, not knowing how much they'd sacrificed for her. She knew she was loved, Paulette said softly, reaching for her husband's hand. That's what matters. Nash had prepared a formal proposal, written out the night before. Martin, legally, we found this on our property. But morally, it belongs to your family. I'd like to split everything 50-50. Half the coins for you, half for us. You take all the jewelry. It was your family's. We'll each sell our portions and divide the proceeds. Martin shook his head. No, you found it. You did the work. You called me when you didn't have to. This is yours. It was always meant for Ruth, Nash said firmly. And through you, it still can serve its purpose. Samuel wanted his daughter to have security. Let us honor that. Paulette spoke up, her voice steady despite her tears. Martin, let him do this. We need it. You know, we need it. Martin looked at his wife, and Nash saw the understanding pass between them. Finally, Martin nodded. The medical bills, Martin said quietly. Paulette's treatments. We've burned through our savings. We're afraid of losing our house. Nash felt his chest tighten, history repeating itself, another family facing the loss of their home, just like Samuel and Constance 90 years ago. Then this is exactly what Samuel intended, Nash said. This treasure was meant to save a family. Let it save yours. They spent the afternoon together, all 4 of them sitting on the farmhouse porch, sharing stories. Martin talked about his grandmother Ruth, how she'd worked as a seamstress her whole life, how she'd been generous with everyone despite having little herself, how she'd taken in foster children when Martin was young. She never forgot what it felt like to lose everything, Martin said. She helped anyone who needed it. Nash shared his own story losing Alice to cancer 5 years ago, the emptiness that followed, how finding the box had given him purpose again. Brooke talked about her divorce, her children, her struggle to rebuild. Paulette described her diagnosis 3 years earlier, the progression of her illness, the fear that shadowed every day. But we have each other, she said, squeezing Martin's hand. That's what Ruth taught us. Family isn't about what you have. It's about who you have. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Martin made a request. Could you keep the photograph and the letters here for a while? I'd like to make copies, create a family history book for my children. They should know where they came from. Of course, Brooke said. I can help digitize everything, organize it properly. Before they left, Martin reached into his pocket and pulled out Constance's wedding ring. I want you to have this, he said to Nash. Martin, I can't. Please, Martin insisted. You've given my family back its history. You've given us hope when we'd nearly run out. My grandmother would want you to have this. She'd want you to know that some treasures are meant to be shared. Nash accepted the ring, feeling its weight in his palm. The simple gold band that Samuel had given Constance, that Constance had hidden to protect, that had waited 90 years to be found. After Martin and Paulette drove away, Nash and Brooke stood in the driveway watching their taillights disappear. "You did a good thing, Dad," Brooke said. "We did a good thing," Nash corrected. That night, Nash sat alone on the porch, holding the wedding ring up to the moonlight. He thought about Samuel and Constance, about their love that had endured despite losing everything. He thought about Alice, about the life they'd built together, about the hole her death had left. But for the first time in 5 years, that hole didn't feel quite so empty. He'd found something to fill it, not gold or treasure, but purpose, connection, the understanding that love and generosity could echo across generations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Nash Ellery felt something he hadn't felt since Alice died. He felt whole. 2 weeks had passed since Martin's visit. Nash spent most mornings organizing the remaining artifacts, cataloging each item with notes about where it had been found and what it might have meant to the Hartigan family. Brooke had returned to her regular routine, sending out job applications and navigating the complicated dance of co-parenting with her ex-husband. The coins and jewelry had been appraised. The total value came to nearly $90,000, enough to change Martin's life, enough to save his home and cover Paulette's medical expenses for years to come. Nash had kept his half of the gold coins in a safe deposit box in town, but he brought the empty strongbox back to the farm. It sat on his workbench in the barn, a reminder of the journey that had brought him back to life. On a Thursday afternoon, Nash was cleaning the strongbox, planning to give it to Martin as well, when he noticed something odd. The velvet lining inside the box was loose along one edge, partially torn. He ran his fingers along the seam and felt something beneath. Carefully, Nash peeled back the lining. Hidden in a space between the velvet and the metal was another envelope, this one smaller, sealed with wax and marked in Constance's handwriting, for Ruth to be opened on her 21st birthday. Nash stared at it, his heart pounding. This was different from the letter they'd already found. This had been hidden separately, deliberately concealed even from the other contents of the box. He called Brooke down from the house. She arrived breathless, and when she saw the envelope, her eyes went wide. "Should we call Martin first?" she asked. "Yes," Nash said. This was meant for Ruth. He should decide. Martin answered on the second ring, and Nash explained the discovery. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Another letter?" Martin finally said. "Hidden separately?" "It must have been important," Nash said. "Something Constance wanted Ruth to know, but only when she was old enough to understand." "Open it," Martin said, his voice quiet. "Please, Ruth never got to read it. But I can. And I'll share it with my children, with her great-grandchildren. The truth shouldn't stay buried anymore." Nash put the phone on speaker and carefully broke the wax seal. The envelope contained several pages, written in Constance's elegant script. The date was February 1936, just before they lost the farm. Nash began to read aloud. "My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, you are a woman now, and strong enough to know the complete truth. What I am about to tell you, I have never spoken aloud, not even to your father. You are my daughter in every way that matters, but you came to us through tragedy and grace in equal measure." Nash paused, glancing at Brooke. She nodded for him to continue. "Your birth mother was my younger sister, Margaret. She was beautiful and trusting and full of dreams. A man came through our county in the spring of 1931, a traveling salesman with smooth words and promises. Margaret fell in love. He promised to marry her, to take her away to the city, to give her the life she'd always wanted. Then she discovered she was carrying his child. When she told him, he disappeared. We never saw him again." Brooke's hand went to her mouth. "Our father was a hard man," Nash continued reading. "When he learned of Margaret's condition, he turned her out, told her she'd brought shame on the family and she was no longer his daughter. Your father Samuel and I had been married only a year. We took Margaret in, cared for her, loved her through those difficult months. But childbirth was dangerous in those days, especially for young women. Margaret was only 19. She died 3 hours after you were born, holding you once, telling me to love you for her. The phone was silent except for the sound of Martin's breathing. Samuel and I had been told we could not have children of our own. The doctors said it was impossible. So when you came to us, small and perfect and crying for your mother, we understood you were meant to be ours. We buried Margaret in the cemetery on the South Hill, though no stone marks her grave. We could not afford one, and we raised you as our own, telling no one the truth of your birth. Nash's voice caught, but he forced himself to continue. The gold coins and jewelry in this box were Margaret's inheritance from our mother. They were meant for her, and through her, for you. When times became hard, when we faced losing everything, I could not bear to see these treasures taken by strangers. They are your birthright, given in love by the mother who died bringing you into this world, and protected by the parents who chose to raise you as their own. The letter went on, describing Margaret's kindness, her gentle nature, her dreams for the future. Constance wrote about how Ruth had inherited her birth mother's smile, her musical laugh, her compassionate heart. You were never unwanted, never a burden. You were a gift first from Margaret, then to us. Every sacrifice we made gladly. Every hardship we endured knowing we were keeping you safe. If we have lost our home by the time you read this, know that you are still our greatest treasure. Family is not about blood alone. It is about love, about choice, about staying when others would leave. You are our daughter, Ruth. You always were. You always will be. With eternal love, your mother, Constance. Nash finished reading and set the letter down carefully. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Martin's voice came through the phone, raw with emotion. My grandmother was adopted. She never knew. She lived 87 years and never knew the whole truth. She knew she was loved, Paulette's voice added in the background. That's what the letter says. She knew that. My grandmother used to say something, Martin continued, his voice steadier now. She'd say, family isn't about where you come from. It's about who chooses to love you. I asked her once why she said that, and she told me her parents had taught her that family is a choice, not just an accident of birth. Now I understand. Samuel and Constance chose her. They chose to love her when her own blood family wouldn't. Nash thought about his own family, about Alice, about Brooke, about the choices they'd made to stay together through hard times. He thought about Martin choosing to care for Paulette through her illness, about Brooke choosing to rebuild her life despite the pain of divorce. The legacy isn't the gold, Nash said quietly. It's this: the choice to love, to stay, to sacrifice for each other. Yes, Martin agreed. That's exactly what it is. After they ended the call, Nash sat with Brooke in the fading afternoon light. The letter lay between them. Constance's words, a bridge across 9 decades. Ruth fostered children, Brooke said suddenly. Martin told us that. She took in kids who had nowhere else to go. She was living what Samuel and Constance taught her, Nash replied. That family is what you make it. That evening, Nash walked alone to the cemetery where they'd found the strongbox. He searched the area carefully until he found what he was looking for, a slight depression in the earth. No marker, no stone. Just a place where someone had been laid to rest 90 years ago. Margaret, Ruth's birth mother, the young woman whose tragedy had become Ruth's blessing. Nash stood there as the sun set, thinking about the generations of love and loss that had unfolded on this land, about secrets kept and truths revealed, about families broken and rebuilt. And he understood that finding Samuel's treasure had never been about the gold. It had been about discovering that love, real love, transcends everything: blood, time, circumstance, even death itself. 1 month after discovering Constance's final letter, Nash woke before dawn with an idea that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He made coffee and sat on his cabin porch. He'd moved into the small building on the property to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. The farmhouse stood empty in the early morning light, full of potential and waiting for purpose. Brooke arrived from town around 8, carrying boxes of pastries and her laptop. She'd gotten into the habit of working from the farm several days a week, sending out resumes and handling freelance marketing projects remotely. "I have an idea," Nash said as she settled at the kitchen table. "And I want your honest opinion before I go any further." He spread out papers he'd been working on: sketches, budget estimates, research printouts about similar projects in other states. Brooke studied them, her expression shifting from curious to surprised to thoughtful. "A retreat center," she said slowly, "for families going through hardship. Free or low-cost stays," Nash explained, "for people dealing with divorce, illness, financial crisis, loss. A place where they can catch their breath, figure out their next steps, heal a little. We'd renovate the farmhouse, maybe add a small cabin. Keep it simple, comfortable. Not luxury, just sanctuary." "Why?" Brooke asked, though her tone suggested she already understood. "Because Samuel and Constance needed this and didn't have it. Because Ruth deserved a soft place to land when her world fell apart. Because Martin and Paulette are drowning in medical bills and might lose their home." He paused. "Because after your mom died, I had nowhere to go except deeper into grief. And because you came home after your divorce with nowhere else to rebuild." Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I've been surviving for 5 years," Nash continued. "Not living. Finding that box, it wasn't just about Samuel's family. It was about remembering what matters. About understanding that legacy isn't what you bury in the ground. It's what you build that helps other people keep going. Have you thought about the logistics? The costs?" Nash pulled out more papers, detailed cost estimates from his engineering background, research on grants and nonprofit structures, plans for phased construction. "Some of my share from the gold coins will fund initial renovations. The rest comes from grants, donations, maybe small loans. I've already talked to a contractor. The house needs work, but the foundation is solid." "What would you call it?" "The Hardigan House," Nash said, "with Martin's permission, as a way of honoring what his family went through and ensuring their story continues to matter." Brooke was quiet for a long moment, studying the plans. Then she smiled. "Mom would love this." "I know. When do we start?" Nash called Martin that afternoon, explained his vision, and asked permission to use the Hardigan name. Martin's response was immediate and emotional. "Yes, absolutely yes. And I want to help however I can. Advisory board, fundraising, anything." "There's more," Martin added. "I've been researching Ruth's family tree. Found cousins I didn't know existed. Descendants of the Hardigans who scattered after the Depression. Would you want to contact them? Get them involved?" "I would," Nash said. Over the next weeks, Nash threw himself into the project with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He hired contractors to assess the farmhouse, met with architects to refine the plans, consulted with lawyers about nonprofit status and liability insurance. Brooke took charge of the digital presence, creating a website and social media accounts. She wrote the story of finding the Hardigan treasure, shared photographs of the letters and artifacts, explained the vision for the retreat center. The response surprised them both. A local newspaper wanted to do a feature story. Donations started trickling in: $50 here, $100 there, from people moved by the Hardigan family's story and Nash's plans to honor their legacy. The article ran on a Sunday. From hidden treasure to community treasure, local man honors Depression-era family. By Monday morning, Nash's email inbox was full. Local contractors offered discounted labor. Churches asked how they could help. Individuals volunteered time and skills. Wyatt Kimball, the neighboring farmer, stopped by with an offer to maintain the land and help with outdoor projects. "This is good work you're doing," he said simply. 2 weeks after the article, Nash received an email from a woman named Beverly Garrison. She'd found the story through a genealogy website. She was Ruth's great-granddaughter, a second cousin to Martin. Beverly drove up from Georgia with boxes of family documents and photograph albums spanning Ruth's entire life. She spread them across the farmhouse table, and Nash saw Ruth's story unfold in images: her wedding day, her children, her grandchildren, her small sewing shop, her volunteer work at a shelter for displaced families. She never forgot where she came from, Beverly said, pointing to a photo of Ruth in her 60s, standing in front of a modest house. That was her home. That was her home. It took her 40 years, but she finally owned her own place. She never took it for granted. Beverly shared stories passed down through the family. Ruth had volunteered at homeless shelters and women's refuges throughout the 1960s and 70s. She said every family deserves a second chance at home, Beverly explained. I never understood why she felt that so deeply. Now I do. Before she left, Beverly donated Ruth's sewing machine, an old Singer from the 1950s. Still functional, still beautiful. Let it be part of the legacy. Let other people create something new with it. Construction began in late autumn. Nash was on site every day, working alongside the contractors when he could, making decisions about paint colors and fixtures and furniture. Every choice honored both the house's history and its future purpose. The main house would sleep 8 to 10, with a large kitchen for families to cook together. Bedrooms were named for the Hardigan family members: Samuel's room, Constance's room, Ruth's room, Margaret's room. Throughout the house, framed letters and photographs told the story of the family whose sacrifice had made this possible. Brooke received a job offer in Nashville, good pay, room for advancement, exactly what she needed. Nash encouraged her to take it. "You've helped me find my path," he said. "Now you need to follow yours." She accepted the job, but promised to stay involved remotely, handling marketing and management from Nashville. "I'll visit every month. This is my project too." A month before the planned opening, the community organized a fundraising potluck at the farm. Dozens of people came: neighbors, Vaughns, volunteers, people who'd read the story and wanted to be part of it. Martin and Paulette drove in, Paulette's condition stable on new medication that the treasure money had helped afford. Nash introduced them to Beverly, to Wyatt, to the contractors and volunteers who'd made everything possible. As the sun set, Nash stood before the crowd and spoke about loss, purpose, and the unexpected gift of finding Samuel's treasure. His voice shook, but he pressed on. "We can't change the past, but we can honor it by building something good for the future. The Hardigan House will open next spring. And when it does, it will welcome families who need exactly what Samuel and Constance needed 90 years ago: a chance to catch their breath, a safe place to land, and hope that better days are coming." The crowd applauded. Children played in the yard. Families talked and laughed around the fire pit as darkness fell. Nash stood apart for a moment, watching. He saw Brooke showing photographs to neighbors, Martin talking with Beverly about family history, Paulette smiling despite her walker. He felt Alice's presence, not as grief, but as blessing. This is what she would have wanted. This is how love continues. That night, alone in his cabin, Nash looked at the plans one more time. Opening day was set for early May. First family already scheduled: the Shepherds, a young couple rebuilding after medical bankruptcy. Nash placed his hand on Constance's wedding ring, which he now wore on a chain around his neck. "I'll build something that lasts," he whispered. "I promise." 8 months later, Nash stood in the completed Hardigan house, running his hand along the refinished oak banister. The farmhouse had been transformed: walls painted in warm neutrals, original hardwood floors restored, comfortable furniture arranged to invite conversation and rest. The kitchen gleamed with updated appliances surrounding a massive farmhouse table that could seat 10. Each bedroom bore its nameplate and a framed explanation of the Hartigan family member it honored. Photographs and letters lined the hallways, telling the story that had started everything. In the living room, Ruth's tin horse sat in a glass display case with a small plaque explaining its significance. Ruth's sewing machine occupied a corner near the window, with baskets of fabric and thread beside it. For mending, for creating, for making something new. Read the card Nash had placed there. It was 1 week before the official opening, and Nash felt his stomach churning with anxiety. Brooke arrived from Nashville for the final walkthrough, accompanied by Martin and the contractor. They moved through each room, checking off items on a punch list: minor paint touch-ups, a loose cabinet hinge, a squeaky door. "It's perfect, Dad," Brooke said, but Nash barely heard her. His mind was spinning with doubts. The Shepherd family would arrive in 7 days, Dale and June, with their 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 3. Dale was recovering from cancer. Medical bankruptcy had cost them their home. They'd been living in a motel for weeks. What if the retreat center wasn't enough? What if he couldn't help them? What if he built this entire place for the wrong reasons? To fill his own emptiness, rather than to genuinely serve others. Brooke noticed his distraction and pulled him aside after Martin and the contractor left. "What's wrong?" she asked. "What if I can't do this?" Nash said quietly. "What if they get here and I don't know how to help them? What if this whole thing is just me trying to fix my own grief?" Brooke took her father's hands. "Dad, you're not here to fix everything. You're here to give them space to heal. That's all." "But what if—" Samuel didn't know if anyone would ever find those coins, Brooke interrupted gently. He buried them anyway. He did what he could with what he had, and he trusted that it would matter somehow, someday. That's what you're doing. You're not responsible for saving them. You're just offering shelter while they save themselves. Nash felt the tightness in his chest ease slightly. "You're right." "I know," Brooke smiled. "I learned it from you." The next days blurred together in final preparations. Nash stocked the kitchen with groceries, prepared welcome packets with local information and house guidelines, and created something he'd been thinking about for months, a welcome book. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal with heavy, cream-colored pages. On the first page, Nash wrote in his careful handwriting, "Your story matters. This house has witnessed loss, but it stands for hope. The Hartigan family who once lived here faced impossible circumstances with courage and love. They left us a legacy not of gold, but of perseverance, family, and the belief that hard times don't last forever. Please share what brought you here, what you hope to find, and what you take with you. May you find both shelter and strength within these walls." He left space for his own entry and added the story of finding the box, of Samuel and Constance's sacrifice, of how their hidden treasure had become this place of healing. The day before the Shepherd's arrival, the community held a small blessing ceremony. The local minister came a woman in her 70s, who'd known families during the Depression from her grandmother's stories. She kept the blessing simple and inclusive, speaking about sanctuary, second chances, and the courage required to rebuild. Neighbors shared how Nash's project had inspired them. One woman talked about losing her home in a fire years ago and never forgetting the people who'd helped. A young man described watching his parents struggle after his father's injury, wishing there'd been a place like this. Martin spoke, his voice breaking. "My great-grandparents, Samuel and Constance, tried to protect their daughter from hardship. They failed, not because they didn't love enough or work hard enough, but because sometimes life is simply too hard. Nash has created what they needed 90 years ago, a place where families aren't alone in their struggles." Beverly presented a hand-carved wooden plaque. "The Hartigan House, where loss becomes legacy." Beneath was a quote from Samuel's original property deed. "For future generations, build something that lasts." They mounted the plaque beside the front door, and Nash felt tears sting his eyes. As everyone left, Nash stood alone on the porch, looking out over the property. The oak tree where he'd found the first box stood strong in the fading light. The cemetery where the strong box had been buried was now maintained and peaceful. The land itself seemed to hold all the stories of the early settlers, of Samuel and Constance, of Ruth and Margaret, of Martin and his family, and now of Nash himself. Tomorrow the Shepherd family would arrive, and the real work would begin. Not construction work, but the work of presence, of witness, of providing space for healing without trying to force it. Nash locked up the house for the night and returned to his cabin. He'd moved there permanently to give families privacy in the main house. It was small but comfortable, and he liked the quiet. He made tea and sat on his small porch, Constance's wedding ring warm against his chest where it hung on its chain. He thought about Alice, about how she would have loved this project, how she would have welcomed families with her gentle warmth. For the first time in 5 years, thinking about Alice didn't bring the sharp stab of grief. Instead, it brought a soft sadness mixed with gratitude for the years they'd had, for the love they'd shared, for the way her memory had helped shape this place. He slept well that night, without the restless dreams that had plagued him since her death. And when he woke at dawn, he felt ready. The Shepherds would arrive at 10. Nash showered, dressed carefully, and walked to the main house to check everything one final time. Fresh flowers in the kitchen, clean towels in each bathroom, welcome packets on the counter. At 9:45, he made coffee and sat on the porch to wait. At exactly 10 o'clock, an older sedan pulled up the driveway, packed with belongings. Nash stood, wiped his suddenly sweaty palms on his jeans, and walked down to greet them. This was it. This was why he built everything. This family, and all the families who would come after them. Dale emerged first, thin, pale, exhausted. June followed, her face tight with stress and worry. Then the children tumbled out, 3 beautiful kids whose eyes held too much knowledge of adult problems. Nash extended his hand and smiled. "Welcome to the Hartigan house," he said. "Welcome home." The children raced toward the oak tree immediately, drawn by its massive branches and the promise of adventure. Their laughter cut through the morning quiet, pure, unself-conscious. The sound of childhood momentarily freed from worry. Dale and June stood by their car, uncertain, their bodies radiating exhaustion and weariness. "Let me show you around," Nash said gently. He gave them the tour slowly, letting them absorb the space at their own pace. June's eyes filled with tears when she saw the kitchen, the large table, the fully stocked pantry. "We've been sleeping in one motel room for 3 weeks," she whispered. "All 5 of us." Dale's jaw tightened, and Nash recognized the expression, a man trying not to break in front of his family. "This is your home now," Nash said, "as long as you need it. There are no obligations, no schedules. Rest. Let the kids play. Figure out what comes next. That's all." He showed them the bedrooms, and the children chose theirs with excitement. The youngest, a 3-year-old named Sophie, immediately claimed Ruth's room because it had a rocking chair by the window. Nash left them to unpack and settle in, returning to his cabin. Every instinct urged him to check on them, to ask if they needed anything, but he forced himself to wait. They needed space more than they needed help. That evening, there was a knock on his cabin door. Penny, the 8-year-old, stood there holding a stuffed rabbit. "Do you have a fishing pole?" she asked. "I do," Nash said. "Do you like fishing?" "My dad used to take me before he got sick. I miss it." Dale appeared, looking embarrassed. "Penny, don't bother Mr. Ellery." "Nash," he corrected, "and she's not bothering me. I'd love to take her fishing tomorrow, if you'd like to come too." Dale hesitated, pride and longing warring on his face. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, that would be nice." The next morning, Nash, Dale, Penny, and 6-year-old Connor walked down to the creek. Nash showed the children how to bait hooks, how to cast, how to wait patiently for the fish to bite. Dale was quiet at first, watching his children more than fishing himself. But gradually, in the peaceful rhythm of the creek, he began to talk. "I did everything right," he said quietly. "Saved money, had insurance, worked hard, and it still all fell apart. The cancer, the treatments, losing my job because I couldn't work, the medical bills piling up faster than we could pay them." Nash listened, keeping his eyes on the water. "We lost the house 3 months ago. Moved in with June's sister for a while, but that didn't work out. Then the motel. And every day I wake up feeling like I failed them." "You haven't failed them," Nash said firmly. "You're here. You're fighting. You got sick and you're getting better. That's not failure. Then why does it feel like it?" Nash thought about Alice's death, about the 5 years of aimless grief that followed, because we measure ourselves against an impossible standard. We think if we just work hard enough, make the right choices, we can protect our families from everything. But life doesn't work that way. Bad things happen to good people all the time. Penny squealed. She'd caught a fish, small but real. Dale laughed, actually laughed, helping her reel it in. Nash saw June watching from the porch, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face at the sound of her husband's laughter. That evening, June came to Nash's cabin with fresh-baked bread. "Found ingredients in your kitchen. Needed to do something with my hands." They talked while Nash made coffee. June shared her own struggle, feeling like she'd failed her children, unable to provide stability, watching them grow up in motel rooms instead of a real home. Nash showed her photographs of Brooke, told her about his daughter's divorce, her rebuilding, her resilience. "Strong people aren't the ones who never fall," he said. "They're the ones who get back up. You're here. You're still a family. That's everything." June asked about the welcome book, had been reading entries from other families who'd stayed. "It helps," she said quietly, "knowing we're not the only ones who've struggled like this." "You're not," Nash assured her. "And someday, you'll write your own entry. Someone else will read it and feel less alone." By the 5th day, transformation was visible in the Shepherd family. The children played freely across the property, their laughter a constant backdrop. Sophie had claimed Ruth's rocking chair as her throne, sitting there with her stuffed rabbit, watching the oak tree sway in the breeze. June had discovered the sewing machine and spent hours there, mending clothes at first, then creating small things, a pillowcase, a simple apron. Her hands moved with purpose, and Nash recognized the therapy in useful work. Dale had regained color in his face. The daily walks around the property, the regular meals, the sleep in a real bed, all of it was rebuilding what cancer and stress had torn down. He'd started helping Nash with small maintenance tasks, needing to feel useful, to contribute. On the 6th morning, Dale knocked on Nash's cabin door early. "Can we talk?" he asked. They sat on the porch with coffee as the sun rose over the eastern fields. Dale was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I got a call yesterday," he said. "Job interview came through. Manufacturing plant about an hour from here. They need someone with my background. Good pay, full benefits." "That's wonderful," Nash said. "The thing is," Dale continued, "I'm terrified. What if I can't do it? What if the cancer comes back? What if I fail again?" Nash set down his coffee cup. "You didn't fail, Dale. You got sick. That's not the same thing. Tell that to my kids who had to sleep in a motel. Your kids have a father who fought through cancer, who kept the family together, who found a way to get them here. They don't see failure. They see a man who didn't give up." Dale's eyes filled with tears. "I just want to give them a normal life again." "You will," Nash said. "But it won't look like it did before. It'll be different. And that's okay." Samuel and Constance lost their farm, lost everything they built. But they made sure Ruth knew she was loved. That's what mattered. That's what lasted. How do you do it? Dale asked. Move forward after losing everything? Nash thought about Alice, about the 5 years he'd spent barely living. You take one step, then another. Some days you fall down, but you get back up. And eventually, you realize you've walked farther than you thought possible. That afternoon, June wrote in the welcome book. Nash saw her sitting at the kitchen table, pen in hand, tears streaming down her face as she wrote. When she finished, she showed him what she'd written. We came here broken, believing we'd failed our children. But in this house, surrounded by the story of the Hardigan family, we learned something important. Families don't fail because they struggle. They fail only if they stop trying. We're still trying. Dale has a job interview. We're looking at apartments. We don't know what comes next, but we know we'll face it together. Thank you for giving us time to breathe, to heal, to remember who we are. The kids will never forget the oak tree, the creek, the feeling of safety. Neither will we. That evening, Nash invited the Shepherds to his cabin for their last dinner together. They were leaving in 2 days. Dale's interview was scheduled, and they'd found temporary housing nearby through a social services program June had connected with. The meal was simple but warm. The children chattered about their adventures, about the fish they'd caught, about the fort they'd built near the creek. Sophie showed Nash a drawing she'd made of the oak tree, with all of them standing beneath it. This is the happy place, she said simply. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Dale pulled Nash aside. I can't thank you enough, he said, his voice thick. You saved us. No, Nash corrected gently. You saved yourselves. I just gave you a place to do it. Still, Dale insisted, what you've built here, it matters. We'll never forget it. After they left, Nash sat alone in his cabin, holding Sophie's drawing. He thought about Samuel and Constance, about how they'd tried so hard to save their family and believed they'd failed. But their love hadn't failed. It had echoed across 90 years and was still saving families now. He walked to the main house and placed Sophie's drawing in a frame beside the welcome book. Someday, another child would see it and know that other families had been scared and had found their way through. Nash stood in the quiet house, touching the photograph of Samuel, Constance, and baby Ruth. The story that had begun with a hornet's nest and a hidden box had become something living, something that would continue long after he was gone. This was legacy. Not gold coins or jewelry, but this family's helping families. Love answering love. Hope passed forward like a torch in the darkness. Tomorrow the Shepherds would take their next steps toward rebuilding, and Nash would prepare for the next family who needed sanctuary. The work continued. The legacy grew. And loss, once again, transformed into something that looked remarkably like grace. 6 months after the Hardigan house opened its doors, Nash sat on the farmhouse porch reviewing the welcome book. 14 families had stayed since spring, and each one had left their story written in careful handwriting or hasty scrawls, in tear-stained ink or hopeful words. The Shepherds had moved into their own apartment 2 towns over. Dale had gotten a job and was thriving. June sent Nash photos every few weeks, the kids in their new school. Dale at work, Sophie still carrying her stuffed rabbit everywhere. They visited once a month, volunteering at the house, helping welcome new families. A widow rediscovering purpose after 40 years of marriage. A family recovering from a house fire that took everything. A veteran finding peace after years of nightmares. Each story was different, but the common thread ran through them all: gratitude, hope, transformation. Pressed between the pages of the welcome book was a wildflower Sophie had picked on her last day, with a note in a child's careful handwriting. This is from the happy place. Thank you. Brooke's car pulled up the drive, and Nash smiled. She visited monthly now, thriving in her Nashville job, dating someone she spoke about with cautious optimism. Her children spent summers at the farm, climbing the oak tree their mother had helped restore. "How's business?" she asked, joining him on the porch. "Booked through winter," Nash said. "Word spreads fast when you're offering hope." They walked the property together, falling into the comfortable silence they built over months of shared purpose. At the cemetery, Nash had planted a memorial garden around the graves. Margaret's unmarked resting place now had wildflowers and a simple stone that read, "Margaret, beloved sister and mother, 1912 to 1932. Martin called yesterday," Brooke said. "Paulette's doing remarkably well on a new treatment. They're starting a college fund for the grandkids." Nash felt warmth spread through his chest. The treasure doing what Samuel had always intended, securing a family's future, creating opportunities, offering hope. "Beverly's book is almost finished," Brooke added. "She wants you to write the foreword." "I will," Nash said. "Ruth's story deserves to be told. All of it, the loss, the resilience, the legacy that outlasted the hardship." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. An elderly woman named Dorothy Sutherland stood at the door, leaning on a cane, her eyes bright with curiosity and memory. "My grandmother lived on the neighboring farm in the 30s, she explained. "She knew the Hartigans. When I heard what you'd done here, I had to come see it." Nash invited her in, and Dorothy moved slowly through the house, touching the photographs, reading the letters displayed on the walls. She stood before the picture of Samuel, Constance, and baby Ruth for a long time. "I remember the stories," she said quietly. "My grandmother said Samuel was a good man, volunteered at the fire brigade, helped neighbors with repairs, never asked for anything in return. Constance taught Sunday school, made sure every child in the community got a Christmas gift, even during the worst years." "They sound like remarkable people," Nash said. "They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things when times were hard," Dorothy corrected gently. "That's different. That's better, actually, because it means any of us could do the same." She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph, protected in plastic. "This is from a community picnic in 1934. My grandmother saved it all these years." The photograph showed dozens of families gathered in a field, adults on blankets, children playing, tables laden with food. And there, in the center, were Samuel, Constance, and young Ruth. They were smiling, surrounded by neighbors, part of a community. Happy, before the world fell apart. "I thought you should have this," Dorothy said. "So people know they had joy once, that their story wasn't only about suffering." Nash accepted the photograph with reverence, and later that day, he added it to the collection in the main room. The smiling Hartigans, captured in a moment of simple happiness, a reminder that every hard story begins with something worth fighting for. Before she left, Dorothy wrote in the welcome book, "Some families survive through what they leave behind. The Hartigans survived through love that outlasted loss. May all who enter here find the same enduring strength." That evening, Nash sat alone in the quiet house. No guests were scheduled until tomorrow, a single father and his teenage daughter, navigating the aftermath of his wife's sudden death. Different circumstances, same desperate need for sanctuary and time. Nash opened his personal journal, the one he kept separate from the welcome book, and wrote, "I spent 5 years trying to bury my grief like Samuel buried his treasure. I thought if I could just hide the pain deep enough, seal it away completely, I could function again. But grief doesn't work that way. It seeps into everything, colors every moment, until you either let it destroy you or find a way to transform it. Finding that box in the hornet's nest didn't fix me, but it showed me something I'd forgotten, that love doesn't end when people die. It changes form. It finds new expressions. Alice loved me through 30 years of marriage, through raising Brooke, through building a life together. Now her love moves through this house, through every family I welcome, through the choice to turn loss into legacy. Samuel and Constance loved Ruth by sacrificing everything, by hiding treasure they'd never see retrieved, by choosing hope when hope seemed foolish. That love echoed for 90 years until it reached Martin, then Beverly, then me, and now every family who walks through these doors. Legacy isn't about monuments or money. It's about how love keeps moving through the world after you're gone. How your choices create ripples that touch lives you'll never meet, in times you'll never see. This house is my ripple. My way of saying that Alice's love didn't die with her. It transformed. And maybe someday long after I'm gone, someone else will find a way to keep it moving forward. As twilight settled over the land, Nash walked to the oak tree, carrying a small wooden box he'd crafted in his workshop. Inside were letters he'd written to Alice over the past year, photographs documenting the creation of the Hartigan house, and copies of entries from the welcome book stories of healing that had helped heal him. He buried the box at the base of the tree, not hidden but planted. He marked the spot with a flat stone bearing a simple inscription he'd carved himself. Here stories begin. 2025. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, someone might find it. They'd learn about the Hartigans, about Nash, about all the families who'd found sanctuary here. And perhaps they'd understand that love, real love, never truly ends. It just finds new ways to keep giving. As Nash walked back toward his cabin, lights came on in the main house. Brooke was inside, preparing welcome packets for tomorrow's guests, making sure everything was ready. Nash stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the farmhouse glowing in the dusk. The same house where Samuel and Constance had raised Ruth, where they'd fought to survive, where they'd ultimately failed to keep their home, but succeeded in something more important. They'd loved completely, sacrificed willingly, and left a legacy that mattered. He felt Alice's presence, not as grief, but as blessing. She would have loved this place, these families, this work. In a way, she'd helped build it. Her death had broken him open. And in that brokenness, he'd finally learned what truly mattered. Nash climbed the steps to his cabin porch and sat with his evening coffee, Constance's wedding ring hanging warm against his chest. He touched it gently, thinking about all it represented: Samuel's love for Constance, their love for Ruth, the enduring power of commitment and choice. Tomorrow he'd welcome the Riverside family, Gerald and his daughter Autumn, both drowning in grief, both struggling to find solid ground after losing wife and mother. Nash would offer them what he'd offered the Shepherds and all the others: space, time, witness, and the quiet assurance that healing was possible. He wouldn't try to fix them. He'd simply be present while they found their own strength, their own path forward. Because that's what sanctuary meant: not rescue, but refuge. Not salvation, but space to save yourself. The stars emerged one by one above the Tennessee hills. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The oak tree stood dark against the sky, its branches reaching upward like prayers or promises or both. Nash thought about Hornet's nest that had started everything, about the box hidden in the hollow tree, about 90 years of secrets waiting to be found. He thought about Samuel's desperate hope, Constance's fierce love, Ruth's resilient life, and Martin's grateful tears. He thought about treasure, how we all bury it in different ways. Samuel buried gold. Nash had buried grief. But the real treasure was never meant to stay hidden. It was meant to be found, shared, transformed into something that helped others keep going. We're all hiding treasures, Nash reflected. Some in the ground, some in our hearts, some in the choices we make about how to love and who to help and what to build with the time we're given. The real treasure is knowing that love outlasts everything: time, death, circumstances, even our worst failures. It outlasts because we choose again and again to keep it moving forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new sorrows, new families desperate for hope. But tonight, Nash Ellery sat peacefully on his cabin porch, a man who'd learned that the opposite of grief isn't happiness. It's purpose. It's connection.